India is facing backlash after members of the ruling BJP party insulted the Prophet Muhammad on one of India's biggest television networks. Both party spokesman Nupur Sharma and the head of the party's New Delhi media unit, Naveen Kumar, made disparaging remarks about the Prophet. The BJP has condemned the comments, denouncing the insult of any religious personalities, and has suspended both officials. The comments have sparked criticism from Arab and Muslim-majority countries, which say the remarks were offensive and Islamophobic. Qatar and Kuwait have summoned their Indian ambassadors and demanded an apology, while the Saudi-based Organization of Islamic Cooperation said the remarks are part of a growing spate of hatred and defamation of Islam in India and systematic practices against Indian Muslims. Some supermarkets have even started pulling Indian products from their shelves. But as the Muslim world condemns India's anti-Islam sentiment, why does it rarely get any attention in the West? And to discuss this further, I'm joined by Udar Bashkar. He is the director at Society for Policy Studies in New Delhi. And Ali Khan Mahmoodabad. He is an associate professor of political science and history at Ashoka University. He joins us from London. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. Uday, what do you make of the backlash coming out from the Muslim world following Islamophobic comments by Indian government officials?
This is a diplomatic crisis for India, and perhaps this could have been avoided, but that's a statement which is in hindsight. The way in which I think the sequence of events began with that debate on television, the remarks made by the former spokesperson now of the BJP, and progressively the kind of pushback we saw from West Asia, the Gulf states, led by Qatar. I think this gradually acquired traction. And finally, when UAE also joined, I think it was very clear that the Modi government in Delhi had to respond. And we saw that very soon the party took the necessary steps. And India tried to assuage the sentiment in all the Gulf states and other countries that had joined in this particular protest. So in summary, I would say that this became a politico-diplomatic crisis.
Yes.
And to the extent possible, the Modi government tried to diffuse it and assuage herd sentiment.
So, Ali, how strong is anti-Islam sentiment run among Indians? I mean, has the Indian government done enough to stamp out Islamophobia from its official ranks?
That's a very complicated question at one level, because the current party in power, the BJP, has of course had to deal with the exigencies of being in power once it came to power 8 years ago. The ideological basis of the BJP and its affiliate organizations has always been a kind of ethno-religious politics, a kind of Hindu nationalism. Hindutva is what they call it. And this has always been an antagonism to other minority groups and opposition groups. So the Muslims, the Christians, at one point the left, and so on. Once the BJP was in power, of course, it realized that in the international community, it's not so easy to get away with very overtly Islamophobic or anti-Muslim politics. So basically, they divided up responsibility. The top leadership remained largely silent. They had a group of leaders that have been actively promoting hate against Muslims for the last 8 years. And yet there's plausible deniability.
So, Uday, we're going to expand on India's relations with the Western powers as well as Gulf regions. But could this latest controversy push New Delhi administration to revisit its policies towards minorities, especially the Muslims?
I think the short answer is yes. Particularly, I would say, in the immediate time cycle, because at the moment, memories of this particular debate on television are still fresh. And my reading is that the Modi government will make an attempt to reach out to all its interlocutors and assure them that Prime Minister Modi and his government are committed to the Constitution. But whether this will last the course till 2024, which is when we have the next general election in India, is a question mark. Because in the domestic debate in India, we already see a pushback against the Modi government, saying that they should be very firm and not change their policies, because that in turn is linked to the base,
Yes.
what has just been described as Hindutva by my co-panelist. And I think that is a complex issue, this
Yes.
particular socio-political churn in India and how that is played out.
Yeah, Alisa, you seem to be agreeing with Uday, but are we likely to see some changes to the government policy on Muslim minority, given India's heavy reliance on the Middle Eastern states when it comes to natural gas, economic cooperation, infrastructure projects, counterterrorism, and intelligence? What's at stake for India when it comes to the Gulf countries, actually?
So look, I think what essentially happened just now was that an official spokesperson of the BJP, in her capacity as a spokesperson, made these comments. But of course, for the last 8 years, there have been lynchings of Muslims merely for the suspicion of carrying meat. Muslims are denied housing in many cities. There have been open calls for genocide of Muslims, rape of Muslim women. There were the CAA protests, the Citizenship Amendment Bill protests 2 years ago. Yeah. So there's been a whole spate of regulations and policies that the BJP has consistently shown time and again that it is willing to peg its domestic politics in antagonism to Muslims. So I think the only change that will happen in the coming years is it will have to be more careful in managing its international image, and therefore perhaps be more careful in how official BJP spokespeople are representing the party position. But I don't see any change coming, because the BJP has basically disaggregated responsibility and cultivated social groups, civic groups in real life and in the virtual world who keep building up this hate.
Yeah, so Uday, speaking of this image, how does India portray itself in the international arena, and does it get free pass when international engagements or its human rights violations at home are concerned?
Well, more than free pass, I would say that India is being accommodated at various levels, meaning that if you look at the current global geostrategic and geopolitical kind of deliberations and policy making, you can see that Ukraine, for instance, is a good example, where New Delhi has not joined the United States and the Western European nations in relation to the war between Russia and Ukraine, or the Russian invasion, to put it more bluntly. And concurrently, India is also a member of the Quad, the US-led 4-country grouping, which has, apart from the US, India, Japan, and Australia, and they have met at summit level. But this is the paradox. India is also part of the BRICS, yes, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And there is a summit that would be hosted by President Xi Jinping next week on the 24th of June that India would attend. So, and again, India is part of the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is led by China. So I think in that sense, India has been able to engage with all the major powers on different issues with different permutations and combinations in terms of its own position. Yeah. So I would describe India as a key variable. And that, I think, is something which most of the major powers recognize, including the Gulf states. So I think the relationship between India and West Asia, the Gulf states from Iran all the way up to West Asia, yes, is a dependency on both sides.
So, Ali, picking up on what Uday said, how has India been striking this delicate balance between the West and Russia, for example? I mean, is this sustainable as the world is headed for a more tumultuous period?
Well, I mean, look, India has a very long history of close relations with Russia during Soviet times also. And even currently, there's a huge amount of exports, almost imports of $7 billion from Russia. We just bought an arms system, the S-400 missile system, worth more than $5 billion from Russia. So there's codependency that way. But of course, India doesn't want Russia to ultimately only take China's side. So that would be geostrategically very harmful for us. Yeah. So on the one hand, while we want to keep Russia in our corner, we don't also alienate America, and therefore Joe Biden has not actually said that much against India's silence on the Ukraine issue, and has largely remained kind of neutral on the issue. There's a history of something called the non-aligned movement. Of course, it's formally passed away, but India still has maintained the policy where, it has maintained close ties between Russia and America at one point, and continues to do so between Iran and Israel. So geopolitical actors who are at loggerheads with each other, India has managed to walk a very fine line between the two.
Maybe that's why the US is still scrambling whether to sanction India or not over the purchase of Russian S-400s. Uday, what do you make of it? And if the US sanctioned India, how would bilateral relations would be impacted?
Well, the second part first. If the United States does decide to sanction India, I think that would be a setback for sure as far as the bilateral relationship is concerned. But that having been said, I think the probability at this time remains a bit low. And the reason I'm saying that is that if you look at the way in which the United States has dealt with India in relation to its larger geopolitical and strategic orientation in Asia, what is now being referred to as the Indo-Pacific, Washington sees New Delhi as an important partner. And this is what has been conveyed, I think, at different levels of the bilateral engagement. And India is also aware that there is a certain fine balance that has to be maintained in the bilateral relationship with Washington. And let me just add that India and the United States have had a very prickly relationship for more than 3 decades.
Yes.
From 1974 to 2008. India was the only democracy that was sanctioned by the United States by law. It was mentioned by name in US law for the first time. So there is a history. Yes, it is improving, but India, I think, is aware of what is at stake. And it has conveyed in private to the United States the nature of the arms dependency with Moscow.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.